an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Veronica Mars, Season 3, Episode 3, Wichita Linebacker. In this episode, Veronica has to find a stolen playbook, and also we get to see how Weevil's doing. It's been rough. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Rachel for commissioning this episode and bearing with me with my technical difficulties today. It has been a ride. I am finally here, calmed down some after my irritation, and I am just very glad to be getting back to this show because it has just been a minute. It's been 2.5 months since the last episode, and I have been like, every time that I thought about it, I don't have my schedule memorized. And I was like, man, I wonder how long it's going to be until the next one. So I'm glad to be back. And this episode, so a lot of times, guys, the Veronica Mars titles are puns, kind of, or like plays on words. I don't know if this is a play on words that I don't get, if it's like referencing something that I'm not familiar with, but if y'all know what it's trying to get at, let me know, because most of the time I can tell what they're doing right off the top, but this one, Wichita Linebacker, does not mean anything to me. And we get in our refresh, how they have previously on Veronica Mars, the flashback to Veronica outing this whole sorority for growing weed, and this woman losing her insurance because she's, was given some seeds from the botany professor. And it is, a clear signal that shit is going to come back around again, which I'm glad of because that was a pretty big deal. Her running that story, or her editor deciding to run that story, and not really being able to control the enormous amount of fallout that was going to happen, I think is a really rough moment for Veronica in terms of learning about consequences that she did not foresee. And it's the sort of thing that Veronica has been doing this kind of thing for so long that I can understand. I would really think that she would have a better idea about that sort of thing. But the illustration they were trying to make there was she was prejudging the sorority sisters for being in a sorority, and it influenced what she was willing to publish about them because of the fact that she had already judged that they were probably up to no good, and she just had to figure out what that no good was. And I think I said in that episode when we were talking about it that I had a little bit of an issue with the fact that the show was trying to make it seem like you can't judge a book by its cover just because somebody's in a sorority. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. No, it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you were in a sorority or in a frat, but there is definitely a culture and a pressure that I think leads to some pretty bad behavior sometimes, and to behave as if that's a super duper not a thing. And that, it felt a little bit disingenuous. And I keep feeling as if the show is preaching at me a little bit. Like they did that this episode with the football thing. And I don't really agree with the argument it feels like the show has been trying to make a couple times. Similarly, what's going on with Veronica and Logan this episode? Veronica winds up apologizing to him, and sure, she is being a little bit extra with the way that she's choosing to track him down, but Logan is also not being honest or forthcoming with her. And I feel like the show had her do all of the apologizing rather than address the fact that he's not really like spending time with her, doing anything that he isn't expressly interested in, and not telling her what he's up to in the meantime either. So it was just a sort of a weird, like, combination of things that I felt like the show came to this, like, conclusion at the end and was really trying to tell me how I should feel about a thing. And I did not agree at all. And then there's this big, like, makeup, I'm so sorry at the end. And I was like, girl, you should not be apologizing to him. This is not on you. Like, part of it is, okay. But, you know, and this season's really, so far, what I'm realizing is I have no patience for Logan anymore. I think that's where I'm at, is Logan was somebody that I really disliked out of the gate when we first started the show. I started to come around a little bit and like understand where he was coming from, but there were still a lot of things that I felt were kind of unforgivable that the show just tried to act like never happened. And then the two of them got together. It seemed like he was doing a little bit better. And I was like trying to bear with him because everything that he was going through with like his mother committing suicide and it turning out like, and his sister being murdered. And then it turns out that his father's the one who did it. And he is like alone in the world. That I really was like, that is fucked up. Okay, Logan, I'm going to give you some time, figure this out. But it doesn't feel like Logan has grown as a person since then. I feel like he's still got this, like, it doesn't, I don't know. I feel like him and Veronica, the thing that's like holding the two of them together feels just like it's their shared trauma regarding Lily and his dad. And that's kind of it. It doesn't seem like he is being better as a person. And you know, honestly, I think a part of this is my 2020 perspective coming at this from a place where people who are extremely wealthy and are not using any of those resources to help other people, I just don't really have time for them anymore. And Logan is literally out here like betting at this like fake casino, and he's dating a woman who one would think would be able to sort of like, and I'm not trying to put this labor on Veronica, but one would think that if Logan were interested in Veronica as a partner, that there would be some sort of shared interest in like the common welfare, because she seems to have that. And so if he doesn't have that, but he has all these resources and he's not using them, what about him is appealing to her? I don't really understand now what she sees in him, because he's just a fucking rich playboy kind of going to college. And she makes fun of him a lot this episode for the fact that he's like doing like weightlifting class. And other than that, it doesn't feel like he's super involved in his schooling. And that joke comes up more than once in a very contemptuous way that feels like she's got baggage behind it. She feels he isn't making the most of the opportunities that are just falling into his lap. He doesn't even have to work for them. This is just shit that happens to him because he's fucking rich and white and manages to do okay. And, you know, just being middle road, he is afforded every sort of opportunity that she really considers precious, and he doesn't consider at all. It's just taken for granted by him. And so I think that's what bothered me a little bit this episode, is that, yeah, they're arguing about her being a little paranoid and following him, but I think there's more underlying her irritation with him lately than that. And the seeds of this are going to start blossoming into outright disdain if he doesn't begin to put in a little bit of effort or have any more self-awareness. There's only so far you can go in a relationship with somebody that you don't have anything in common with. And like I said, their shared trauma is, to me, all they have in common now. And as they begin to grow past that, I don't think that's going to be enough anymore. You know, like, I'm tired of making excuses for him when really what the kid needs is therapy. And he has all the resources in the world. He could get a therapy appointment every single day to start his day off and really work through some shit. I do that work, man. Do it then. But he's not. He's just kind of letting that, like Rachel says, he's using his past to excuse his behavior. It feels like he's sort of just being like, well, you know, I've gone through a lot, so, and I'm like, yeah, you have. Granted, you really have. But like a lot of people have gone through many, many things. We have to figure it out, and so do you. So that being the like overarching sort of, because there's a parallel between what's going on with Veronica and what's going on with this soccer dude, Kurt, I think his name is, and his girlfriend, Trish. They're trying to make a sort of a connection there because Trish, it turns out, is the one that's kind of trying to control his life. And the story with this kid is he got a football scholarship to go to Hearst. He tore his ACL, and essentially the team is looking at him, or the coaches are looking at him, as a waste of a scholarship. They are spending money to get him to come to this school that he cannot actually fulfill his end of the bargains, as they see it, and perform on the team. And this is one of the things that gets me so insane about, like, I have a huge problem with athletics in college. Like, it's just an incredibly corrupting system that I think should be absolutely separated entirely from academics. I don't feel like you should be allowed to get an athletic scholarship to a college, especially if that college is making money off of its games. I feel like that shit is unconscionable, that is something that we allow to happen. And, you know, it's not like the athletes from the college get paid, but the college will definitely make a ton of money on merch and on tickets and everything. So I just don't understand how this is like something that we agreed was fine to do. And I really feel for this kid because, you know, Trish says at one point that his grades are great. He's obviously somebody who takes school seriously and his education matters to him. And for that to be seen by his coaches as completely not the point, he can't play, what's he doing here, is gross. It's disgusting. And I really hate it. I hate that this is like also a pressure that is put on people where they aren't up to the classes that they're taking, but they are amazing at football. So they get brought into this like environment at this school that will hold their hand and make all kinds of concessions so that they can continue to get passing grades, even though they're not doing the work, just because the school wants them on their team. That's like a flip side of the equation. So you're really good, and therefore your grades are they don't matter, and they will put pressure on teachers to like overlook really, you know, terrible performance or no performance. Or you have this, where it's a kid who genuinely cares, but because he injured himself playing the game that they are like demanding of him, now he is seen as dead weight. And it's just the worst. I fucking hate it. So what happens is that he had missed like a practice. And one of the things that we first see is him getting driven through these like punishing sets of like stair running, you know, by his coach because he missed a practice due to the fact that he was in his like taking his philosophy class, or he had an exam or something, and his coach is yelling at him about how you know, if you're here, I'm trying to find the spot where, because what the coach says is, so is it too tough? Instead of skipping meetings, why don't you just quit? Focus on your philosophy full time and read your Plato, drink your espresso, eat all the cheese you want. I mean, what a weird thing to say. Eat all the cheese you want. I mean, I guess he's talking about like cheese plates and wine and elitism, but it's just a kind of like, all right, guy. And this kid, as it turns out, borrowed the playbook in order to look it over on his free time, even though it's not supposed to leave the locker room. And the reason for that being that the other team might be able to get a hold of it. And what? Rachel says, because football players can't eat cheese. Rachel, is that a real thing? Oh no, she said JK. I was like, you could say literally anything about the culture of football and I would fucking be like, oh, I would not know to argue because sports are weird and weird shit is like the norm that I don't get, Like there's that whole thing about how before going into a fight, boxers were supposed to like not have sex for like the week before, which I just, just shit like that. So not eating cheese, honestly, I wouldn't really be that shocked if that was a rule. It doesn't make any sense, but that has nothing to do with it. Making sense is not the thing that anybody seems to care about when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, this kid takes the playbook, and then when he is showering off and about to like put it back after using it, he realizes that it's not in his backpack and begins to absolutely freak out. And there are a list of potential suspects who could have taken it. The first one is his current girlfriend, Trisha's ex, who is a painter. And there's, he might want to get this kid kicked off the team so that maybe he potentially leaves the school and Trish is up for grabs again because she's not going to be dating long distance, he assumes. There are some holes in the theory, but people do stupid things for revenge that they don't think through all the time. So, okay. There is the potential that it is his friend that he calls Pops. I think it's Pops. And that was the person that I suspected out of the gate. And when the piece of popcorn falls out of his bag, which it is hilarious to me that is the thing. Guys, look, I get it. The show needs there to be clues, right? Like that's how this show works. And whether or not the clue is actually like reasonable, that's very secondary. But can we talk about the idea that this kid named Pops was given popcorn as a gift, and then it just sort of like has been so embedded in like the folds of his clothing, I guess, that there's literally popcorn just falling off him when he does things now? Like, how did he get popcorn in this kid's bag? Like, really? I want to know how that works, because like if somebody was to find a clue that I left behind, you know what they'd find? They'd find one of these fake nails. That's what they'd find. They'd find one of my nails. That's 100% it. I could actually see that happening too, because these shits pop off all the time. But yeah, the fact that, because she's looking initially for like oil paint, because the painter leaves marks on everything he touches. So she's like, okay, there's got to be like some marks on your bag if he's the one. And I love that she's like, please be guilty, because she really did not like the guy. But yeah, it turns out that Pops is going into his bag to steal his homework and copy it. And it's a sort of like a weird moment, because Pops is like he hasn't done something as unconscionable as stealing the playbook, because Pops is like getting an offer, I think, to go to a different school we overhear. And so I was thinking that it might be something linked with that. But I did sort of, my initial reaction at finding out that he had just stolen the homework was like, why didn't you just ask him? I bet he would have helped you. And then I realized as the show goes on, Kurt, and correct me guys, I'm pretty sure that's his name, but I have not double checked that, seems to be a pretty like morally rigid person. And I think Pops knows that Kurt would put up a fight about him just straight up copying homework. He would be willing to help, but Pops doesn't want help. He wants that shit to be done already. And I was like, all right, yeah, I could see that this kid wouldn't help him, and he'd feel like, I'll take it. It's the kind of like, don't ask permission, ask forgiveness kind of thing, where Pops feels some personal loyalty to his friend, so he wouldn't get him in trouble and turn him in. He'd be disappointed and irritated, but he wouldn't do anything to upset what this kid was accomplishing by stealing. And then we find out that it was actually Trish. And the thing with Trish is that she has a lot of the same resentment for the athletic department that I have, where she feels like he has injured himself. Oh, sorry, guys. Rachel said, I'm not sure it's an offer from a different school. I read it as Pops was being offered the scholarship that Kurt currently has. I think that the deal is Pops was going to be offered the scholarship because he got an offer from Sonoma to go there for a full ride. And so they were realizing that they needed to do something to keep him. And so they were trying to get rid of Kurt in order to give him the scholarship since he's actually able to perform. They were trying to do it. Have you guys ever had this happen? I think I've mentioned this before, that the school that I went to for my senior year, it was like a private arts high school that you were required to apply to at least 15 colleges as a senior. And those of you who apply to college know what an insane task one application is. 15 is just mean, you know, and it's expensive also because you have to pay application fees. I was able to file for assistance with my application fees. So a lot of them were dropped by 50% or 75%, but it still wound up adding up a ton. And I wound up getting accepted to every school I applied to, which was amazing, but I had to really consider my budget regarding which school. And I always say that I wound up going to Carnegie Mellon because it paid my half tuition 4 years. I got the Andrew Carnegie Scholarship to go to that school. Pretty big deal. They give out 2 a year. And I was really proud, you know, half tuition 4 years. And then Oberlin College came at me and they offered me a full ride. I had never even heard of Oberlin College. They wanted to pay for me to come and visit the campus. But I was like so hung up on the idea of a big name school, and Carnegie Mellon is a big name school in the theater community, that I was like, I didn't even consider Oberlin, even though they were really trying to get me. They like were aggressive about it. And I felt weird because I didn't understand how this worked really. And it never even occurred to me that they would like, you know, be that way about trying to get me. And I look back now and my time at Carnegie was so terrible. It was like one of the worst years I ever went through. I learned a lot about myself and what I was like willing to do and what was important to me versus what I thought had been important when I started. But I wish so much that I had just gone to Oberlin and had it all paid for and not had to worry about it. And also was at a school that seemed to like care that I was coming and value me and like fight for me. So these sorts of moments where a school is like, oh, we can't lose you. I understand how that could really like as an athlete be a difficult thing to give up. You know, like I'm saying, I don't like that this is the way the system is set up, but feeling like an institution is fighting to keep you it's flattering on the one hand, it's sheer vanity, but it's also like especially if you are a person who has not felt particularly appreciated a lot of your life, that can be one of the first times that somebody has seemed to be like on your side. And with Trish being so angry, I really get that because she feels that Kurt has given up a lot and he got injured, has sustained an injury that will likely change the course of his life. An ACL tear is not a small thing. That will fuck you up forever. You can get over it and still go on to, but it's not a guarantee. That shit can really ruin your life. And I just, like, as much as she doesn't have the right to control his life the way she does, I understood very deeply her feeling resentful and protective of this guy that she loves and the way that he's being abused by the system. And obviously Veronica understands that too, because she sort of uses this to get to Trish later. She pretends that they figured out, the coaches, that Kurt took the playbook and says that he's like being fucking put through the ringer by his coaches. And she feels so bad that he's having to suffer more because of something that she did instead of just being kicked off, which is what she anticipated. She goes to find the playbook in order to try and clear his name. And I liked that Veronica figured out who did it and figured out why and what it was going to take to get her to give it up and admit what she did, because I was still not following at that point. It wasn't like, even when Veronica was telling her, oh, he's being put through the ringer, and she was using that as a means to convince this girl, I still didn't really get the play that she was making or why this was working. And it wasn't until later when she just flat out explains it that I was like, oh, okay. Because initially I thought, Trish has it. Is she like secretly, you know, does she have a deal with another team? Is she actually kind of his enemy and he's been dating her and didn't know? That sucks that she's like a backstabber. But it turns out that she's doing something that she feels will ultimately benefit him and be good for him. He's just not willing to make the tough choice in her eyes. And what we wind up finding out is he really has a deep sense of loyalty to the game, to his team, regardless of how he is being treated. And he feels like there's a real sense to him of just, that's the way this goes though, girl. And I know it's not really fair, but I also understand how it works. I am willing to cope with how it works. You don't get to like pull me out of this. I have agreed to play the game, pun intended. And I just felt bad for her because I got where she was coming from very much, but I also understood where he was coming from. You can't be with somebody that doesn't trust you to make your own major life decisions. If they're like constantly trying to step in and, you know, and change things for you without even consulting you or taking your desires into account, saying, oh, you don't know what you know, you say you want to keep playing, but I know that's not good for you. I will do XYZ. That is a really slippery slope, kids. And I had to learn that myself. Like, I was talking about this actually with a friend recently. She is seeing a kid who's a little bit younger than her. And thus he is going through some stuff now that requires, my contact fell out. He's going through some stuff now that requires like a level of trial and error that like you're not going to be able to learn anything unless you go through it. It's that kind of like, you know, that's sort of how life works, man. And that's the part about having kids that I find like really terrifying. Forgive me as I put my contact back in. Kids, this has not been my day. Now I don't know where it went. Why does this happen to me? Where'd it go? Is it on my face? Nope. Well, that's that. Sorry. Let me get back to what I was saying. Oh, making mistakes. So I've said before that having kids, for me, the toughest thing would be having gone through some of these life experiences and watching a kid going through the same thing I did or something very similar, knowing perfectly well what's likely to happen, trying to explain to them what's going to happen and what to expect, and them not listening and me having to just let them fuck up. And I am not good at that. I mean, I'm a control freak in the best of times. Like, you know, never mind when somebody is really like putting something on the line and at risk. And when it comes to people that I really care about, it's so much worse. And I'm doing it because I love them and because I'm trying to help, and I don't want to watch them go through pain, and I don't want them to be like suffer setbacks that will discourage them and make them feel bad about themselves, because they're great and I love them and I don't want that for them. But that's the way life goes, and you have to just be willing to let people live. And that's the thing that I think Trish is learning here. You know, the next guy she dates, she's going to have to realize that there are times she has to sit on her hands and just let them screw up. And nobody likes that. I mean, especially when you are linked enough with somebody in life that it feels that their decision is going to also affect you. That can be the like excuse a lot of us use when it's a significant other, that, yeah, but if they fuck up this, it's also going to screw XYZ up for me. Yeah, but you signed up for that by getting into this relationship with this person. You have to trust them. And that's the like through thick and thin kind of thing. And that can be really, really hard, you know? And you have to trust that your significant other will also consider the potential effect on you of certain things going wrong. So eventually it turns out that, yeah, she stole it. However, her ex is the one who actually has it now. Because when he came into her room to drop off the painting of her, claiming that she's his muse or whatever, he found it and took it, and him and his friend are going to be like using this playbook to influence the way the game turns out because they're making bets on it. And they give the playbook to the opposing team so that that team will be all prepped for whatever it is that Hearst has up their sleeves and be able to completely pummel them. It seems that doesn't work because we hear the score a little bit later, and Hearst wound up winning anyway. So I guess that they changed their plays at the last second. But yeah, it's a pretty like, I don't know. I had really mixed feelings on the way this went down because it's just, the kid winds up breaking up with Trish, and I really get it. I do. But I was like, man, she really was trying her best though, you know? Oh, Agnes is right. She says, I hope when Kurt's calmed down, he's going to look at the other scholarships Trish has lined up. Right? Because she says at the beginning how she's like figured out a whole thing for the like a Pell Grant, and, you know, she's really looking out. And again, she's being controlling, but I feel like she's learned a lesson here. And I think if he were to reconsider and maybe even get back with her, she would not do this kind of thing again. But I respect if he isn't willing to make that risk to take, because he takes loyalty and like commitment so seriously that this kind of breach, something that she would even consider doing something like that, I don't think he would be able to get past it. And that makes sense. So and that little casino thing, guys, did we get any like information about the people behind it? Because there's the weird chat between him and the kid who's like gonna do that bet, the one with the stutter, and the kind of confrontation between him and Logan and Veronica because he doesn't like the two of them fighting in the middle of his little area. But I feel like there's something about this kid that like the fact that there is a secret casino situation. Did we know about this at all? Was this hinted at? Because like I said, it's been 2.5 months since the previous episode, and I'm not sure if there are things that I'm supposed to be making connections on, or maybe I, have seen before or heard hinted at before that I didn't know about. And let's see. Rachel says, I think it's Logan's friend that runs it in his room. Oh, was that Logan's hotel room? Or is he still in the hotel, or is he in a dorm? He's in the hotel still, right? It's not Logan's room, his friend's own room. Oh. Gotcha. Okay. That's a big ass room. By the way, I love dorm rooms on television because they just are always so generous, y'all. Okay. So I kind of feel like something involving that casino setup is going to have to come back up later. Like that's too big a project, I guess, to not return to it as a set piece, I feel like. So I have a suspicion we'll be seeing that shit again. All right, let's talk about Weevil. So we start off seeing Weevil at this car wash that he's working at. Lot of employees at this car wash, by the way. This place is humongous. We see like 6 of them in the background, all in uniform. I have never seen a place this big. Not to say that they don't exist, but just not where I'm from. And this is a condition of his parole, is that he find like an honest paying job that will guarantee he is able to continue living as a productive member of society. And he isn't doing well with it. The problem that Weevil has is anger management, and that winds up becoming an issue later as well. Weevil has a lot of rage, understandably, and when somebody does something objectively fucked up, he cannot hold himself back, and nobody else can hold him back either. It turns out he managed to skate by with an assault charge rather than murder, which I would love to know how that worked out. I'm just like a little bit bummed that we don't ever see the details of how that all went down, because I was extremely invested in Weevil not going to jail. So for the previous season to end with him being arrested and then no mention of anything else until now, when he's like, basically out on parole, I'm just a little bit, I feel a little robbed. I want more of that. I wanted to see how, he got around it. I wished that it wasn't a surprise to Veronica. I wish that she had, kept up on what was going on with him as well. I have this weird thing of, with Veronica and Weevil, where I want to think of them as better friends than they are. And it's obvious that she's, standing for him in this episode with trying to get him a job. But it's so, the fact that she didn't know what was going on with him until, it seems, this episode when she, came to track him down. I wanted her to be, more involved in what happened. And I guess the thing is, she knew he was guilty of the murder, and I think that maybe caused her to step back a little bit. It's one thing to be you're going to be my buddy when I go and scare somebody at a store and you have all of your crew come in and fuck shit up, or, she can see him as being an essentially harmless but scary figure that's useful. But when it looks like maybe he actually murdered a person, she sort of seems to reconsider and pull back. And it's just, she's sort of treating him the way I feel like the show treats him a little bit, where they want him to be the scary guy with not the same kind of scruples. He has his own kind of morality, and they want to use him when they need that, but they aren't that interested in exploring what it means to genuinely be someone violent who does that sort of thing a lot. And I'm hoping that the way this begins, this season, with him fucking starting to assault his boss, later on assaulting a dude. I mean, if they reported him, he would go back to jail. Correct me if I'm wrong. Somehow he manages to not, and is still out trying to find another job. But he goes and finds the boyfriend and beats the hell out of him because he finds out that the boyfriend's the one hitting the kid. And I just feel like if they would be the kind of people that would call the police, I would assume. Maybe they are too afraid because the boyfriend was genuinely beating the kid up. But that does not stop people when, somebody, just because they were in the wrong, I would not be at all surprised to find out that they still call the cops on Weevil. And Weevil, being an ex-con, Hispanic, and essentially a stranger who's not even part of their family or anything, I don't see the boyfriend getting in trouble. I see Weevil getting in trouble, and that's it. And he would go back to jail. But somehow that's not what winds up happening. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad. I don't want Weevil going back to jail. But when I heard that he assaulted the guy, I didn't think that the next issue was going to be finding him another job. I thought that the next issue was going to be, oh, Weevil's back in jail, what now? And the fact that it's just finding another job for him, I was kind of like, that doesn't strike for me. I feel like he would be out. Anya says, can they accuse him of murder if they never found the body? Maybe that's the problem. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe they never found it and that's the problem. Rachel says, I feel like they are friends when it is convenient for her. Yeah, that's definitely true. Veronica, it's, obviously she's trying to get him a job here. It's not that she doesn't give a shit about him at all, but it's only when she thinks of it. He's not somebody that is on her mind unless she already went to him because she needed something and then saw that he's going through some shit. But she is not the kind of friend that checks in with him to see how he's doing outside of her needing shit. So, you know, so yeah, she manages to get her father to give Weevil a chance. And it's so awful, guys, because there is a moment where you really think this shit's going to work out. We first, like, I want to mention too, last season we had searched, to see what Weevil looked like nowadays. And he is not nearly as pretty anymore as he had used to be. He looks strange now. And this season we are starting to see shades of that popping up. I think that maybe Weevil started taking steroids or something, because his skin had used to be pretty good, and he has broken out really badly. And you can see it in several shots. Just, he is wearing a layer of makeup over some really bad acne that he's old enough. This shit doesn't just start. I think he might have been using something that caused that. And there were times where he comes into the shot and I initially didn't quite recognize him, because I think he's gained a little bit of weight as well. And so, like, his whole look is a little bit different than it had been. But the assignment that he's given by her dad is to go and find out if this one dude is embezzling by selling sneakers off the back of a truck on his own time. And basically stealing from the company that he works for. And Weevil is looking at the guy. I love that he's like, this guy can't be stealing. He reads comic books, to which I'm like, yeah, that's not okay. I mean, I guess, but that's by no means like any sort of definitive. But Weevil is, I think what the show is trying to do here is like, it takes a criminal to know a criminal, and Weevil sees the dude and is just like, that doesn't track. And he figures out that it is the actual delivery guy, and that he has started to use heroin. And he says something about how, see, he has the sniffles and he's eating candy all the time, which I'm really, really... is that a thing, guys? I didn't know that using heroin means that you start eating candy a lot. Is it like, does it cause like a sugar crash that you need to like bounce back up from? Or what is that about? Like, because initially I thought he meant like it gives you the munchies, which maybe that is all he meant, you know, in which case it wouldn't have to be candy. That's just the example in this. But I didn't realize that I had thought for some reason that heroin lowers your appetite. And I think I just was under that impression because the sort of like stereotype of a heroin addict is somebody who is like agonizingly thin, like they begin to drop weight entirely. So I had assumed that was because of a corresponding loss in appetite. But I realized once he said that I had no like basis for that assumption. It was just all like putting pieces together that don't necessarily fit together. So I wasn't sure about that. Rachel says, apparently he had a medical condition that needed medication that caused the swelling and acne. Apparently steroids were part of the treatment and why he wasn't in the first few episodes. That sucks. I feel bad for bringing it up now. I probably just shouldn't have said anything. But it is sort of, I forget that steroids are like, you know, part of legitimate medical treatment for things too. So I didn't even consider that because, you know, he's a dude that is meant to look threatening on TV. So if he needs to take steroids in order to get that muscle mass up, that would be very par for the course. Yeah, that sucks, man, though. I hope he's all right. I mean, because he looks weird in this episode. But yeah, so he does this amazing job. He's able to like put the pieces together, and you can see that Keith is really impressed, realizes he maybe was wrong about this kid, there's a bit of like hopefulness to Keith that I really liked. It's separate from Weevil specifically and more about the idea that maybe he has figured out a way to give this kid another chance. And I really felt bad because once Weevil fucks up, Keith isn't willing to take another risk on him. And honestly, there was a part of me that wanted him to be willing to put his neck out just one more time. But we saw Weevil get talked down from punching his boss at the car wash, talk to Veronica, get hassled just a little bit more, and immediately grip his boss up and nearly punch him again. When Veronica tells her dad it won't happen again, I couldn't really 100% believe that. Weevil, it's not about learning a lesson. Weevil has to learn a kind of self-control that is obviously something that he has never had to incorporate into his life. That's an entire personality shift, really. So, you know, I as much as I wanted to think, Keith, if you sit down with him, if you explain that kid, because what Keith is really hurt by, I think, with Weevil going, and he's assigned to stake out this house because this grandpa and grandma suspect that their daughter-in-law, I think, is abusing their kid. Apparently, like, she got their son died, and so she has sole custody of this kid, and they think that she is beating him. So they hired a private investigator to collect evidence that she's beating him, and that way they can get custody of their grandson. And he sends Weevil to do the stakeout. And Weevil sees she's not the one beating the kid. It's her boyfriend beating the kid. And Weevil, in true Weevil fashion, gets up out that car and goes and fucks that man's whole day up. Granted, I'm sure that felt wonderful in the moment, you know, as somebody who has a real rage problem and also has fantasies of enacting violence on any number of people. I get it, like, wholeheartedly get it. But what Keith says later is that him doing this caused any evidence that Weevil might have collected to be completely thrown out. The woman got her lawyers involved, and now the grandma and grandpa have absolutely no chance of rescuing this kid from this situation. So not only did Keith suffer from losing the job because he was fired, and watching this kid that he was like hopeful would do okay fuck up royally, but now there is a child that is being abused that he can't help save. It's a real, like, fucking triple threat of terrible consequences for this whole thing. So, you know, this is the kind of situation that if the show had not constructed the situation so carefully, it would be hard for me to watch Keith refuse to give Weevil another chance. But as it happens, everything lines up to be, I can't blame him for that at all. You know, this is his business and he's trying to help people a lot of the time. And this was, Weevil was not able to keep the bigger picture in perspective, you know? So if he can't do that, there are other people who are going to wind up being hurt and can't have it. And eventually it could lead to Keith maybe like losing his PI license. I don't know how that works, but I imagine that could happen. So, you know, this is his entire fucking livelihood. He can't be doing that. So in the end, there's this whole other thing. And I don't have 5 minutes left because I stopped to pee. So I probably have 10 minutes left. I haven't even talked about the whole thing between the feminists and what is the name of that paper, guys, that these kids run? Lampoon. Thank you, Rachel. So apparently there was like a front page spread in the school newspaper of all of these topless girls, with like the title, "We Go to Hearst, Go Ahead and Rape Us Too," which I don't feel like that is the headline you want to go with or the slogan you want. I feel like what they were trying to do here was an equivalent of the slut walk, which was an anti-rape culture march where girls dressed in either very revealing clothing or they were nude, as close to nude as you could get without like violating the law, and is essentially saying, still not asking for it. Like, yeah, I can wear whatever I want. That has nothing to do with consent. What I am wearing is no invitation. That has nothing to do with it. But this headline says, go ahead and rape us. That's not, I'm still not giving consent. That's a weird kind of consent that I find to be completely missing the point. I did not think that this was a good example of what I think the show was trying to get at here, you know? And these girls, apparently the Lampoon does like a rebuttal on their newspaper, and it's a bunch of topless guys. And the headline is, no thanks, except for maybe the blonde in the middle. And at the end of the episode, we find out that the blonde in the photo was raped. So the women who are part of this, like, you know, campaign really feel that the dudes who did this headline are in some way responsible for what happened to this girl, which I can't help but agree with, because what are you doing, dudes? You know, it's not, no thanks, but I'd like the girl in the middle's number or something like that. You could at least kind of play off and be like, well, but she's cute though. Instead, it's, no thanks, I won't rape you. I'll rape the girl in the middle. And that's a whole other, like, I don't... And as it turns out, the dean is kind of predisposed to not like or trust the feminists. He is leaning on Veronica for her to give up the source on who told her that they had gotten the seeds for the marijuana from a member of the staff. And she is refusing to give up her source. And as she is in there arguing with him, because he says that he will expel her if she doesn't, the two groups come in, the guys from the Lampoon and the woman from the like anti-rape organization. I don't remember if it has a name even, but they are coming in to argue about these headlines. And the dean sort of sidelines that whole thing in favor of talking about his car that got trashed. And he pulls up these photos of his car with all of this graffiti spray painted on it that sounds, because of the words used, like it's the feminists who did it. And it's just one of those like false flag things. It is so obvious that they didn't do that. This is like, you know, when you see graffiti, did you guys see that somebody went into like a veterans graveyard and like spray painted BLM on a bunch of the headstones? And people kept trying to be like, oh, these Black Lives Matter protests are out of hand. That wasn't them, kids. That is so not their jam at all. They aren't that stupid. Of course, this was some either active right-winger trying to frame them, or some shitty kid who just thought it was funny and didn't think through what this was going to look like. And the obviousness of this whole ploy goes right over the dean's head. Like, he wants to believe that these girls did this. So he's just willing to go with that as his first instinct. And when Veronica talks to Weevil after he loses his job with her dad, she gets him to help fix the dean's car as a means of, like, you know, trying to smooth things over. Because what Veronica sort of winds up doing is calling the dean's bluff and being like, I know you said you would expel me if I didn't tell you. So I'm waiting. Go ahead, because I'm not telling you. So if you're going to expel me, you best do it. Get it over with. And she's doing what she can to like get him to calm down at the same time. But I think she's pretty confident on her bluff. So she gets the dean's car fixed, and Weevil, when he does this, finds a CD in the CD player in the car. And this tips her off that probably the dean isn't listening to whatever this band is. I don't even remember. Transplants, I think was what it was. And she had seen a photo of his family, and realizes that his kid is wearing like face makeup. It looks like kiss makeup, but I guess whatever, the transplants are meant to be. She somehow like figures out that that's the connection there. And she asks the dean if his son had wanted to go to a transplants concert. And the dean was like, yeah, but he's only 15 and he wasn't allowed. And she's like, yeah, I think he may have done it anyway. And then she points out a part of the car that allegedly the car had been damaged by baseball bats, but there's this like one area that is dented in way more than a baseball bat could ever have managed. And she's like, I think that he fucked your car up, realized you were going to flip out, and then decided to create this whole like fake scenario to cover up what he did and make it look like this other group did it. And the dean, there's like, you can see this impulse to sort of be like, that's not what happened. That's rather a stretch, don't you think? But it becomes pretty clear as she explains that that's likely what happened. And he sort of realizes and begins to back off. Anya says, how do you like or not the dean? How much do you like or not like the dean? So the dean is an interesting, because like later on when she's talking to Logan, or maybe she's talking about, I think she's talking to Weevil. She says the dean would prefer that women didn't wear pants, like insinuating that he is such a backward misogynist that he doesn't even approve of women wearing trousers, kind of thing. I thought that was an interesting thing because I didn't get that from him. I felt that he was a dude that was like very overwhelmed, kind of doing his best, but not inclined to think much about the people involved at the school. And what I mean by that is the dean is used to probably dealing with a lot of very stupid college kids and a lot of very silly problems or things that are like meant to be clever that aren't. And so I think he has an impulse to not look deeper at situations because most of the time it isn't deeper. And so I think he's kind of getting into the place that some detectives can get, where they'll see like the obvious connections and they will fall for that because let's face it, most criminals are not very smart. Like most people are not very smart. So the connections that might seem so obvious as to be a red flag, really in life, a lot of times it is that simple. And so the vibe that I got from him was really like, it looks like you guys trashed my car. I am assuming you're really angry. You're also very young. I bet you're not thinking through what this is. And I'm sure that you did this. And now it's like, you realize you made a mistake, but you were angry and you did this thing. It seems obvious that it's not them. But I can also understand kind of being like tired of the bullshit and going for the easiest solution. I do not think it was him shitting on the feminists. I don't feel like it was him having it out for them. I feel like he was just being lazy about it, honestly. Now, that's not to say that the laziness and having like maybe some contempt or misogyny in his veins, they're not mutually exclusive. But I didn't hate him. He was super frustrating. I really didn't like his immediate tell me the source or I will expel you threat, because that felt very strong army in a way that was just like, it felt like bullying, I guess is the word I want really there. So I didn't like that. However, he is in the position of knowing that potentially there's a member of staff who's engaging in like fucking drug trade, essentially, and I can understand that being an enormous concern. I don't know how funding works in this situation at the school, but I would imagine that if you have a teacher who winds up being like wrapped up in a fucking drug ring, which it doesn't sound like that's what's going on at all. We know that it was a botany professor who just had some seeds and was like, hey, listen, I know you're suffering. Here's the thing. But there's no reason for the dean to think that. The dean could very easily be like, I have somebody in my school who is actively supplying the community. And he could think it's a much bigger situation than it even is. Honestly, for all we know, it is a bigger situation than what it sounded like. We got a very sort of like PG, I'm just trying to help kind of story from the sorority. But the sorority either could be lying, or they could just not know how big the trade is. So I can imagine that the dean is concerned that if that turns out to be a large activity that's based around his school, that will look really bad for him, and really bad for the school. So there was a big part of me that was like kind of sympathetic to the position that he was in, even though he was being a real dick about it. The actor who plays the dean too is super familiar. I'm sure I've seen him in something. And whatever I had seen him in, I think I liked his character. So my instinct when I saw him was to like him again, because whatever he had been in made some sort of impression. But then I sort of like curbed that because he was so intense right out of the gate with Veronica. And as time went on, he has been reasonable. Megan says he was on St. Elsewhere. I never saw that. But yeah, he was like reasonable in terms of listening to Veronica's hypothesis on what actually happened with his son, and was willing to hear her out. And once she finished presenting her case, conceded that that was a likely story. And that for me was really the litmus test on how I felt about him, was if he continued to argue against what she was suggesting happened in a blind attempt to defend his child and continue to smear the feminist quadrant on his, in his school, that would have made me go, okay, so this guy's just garbage and he wants to think what he wants to think. But he piped down and listened and decided to drop it. And that is more than a lot of people are willing to do. So for that, he gets some grudging respect, and I am willing to suspend my judgment until further data is acquired. Rachel says, Ed Begley Jr. Oh, it rings a bell. A Mighty Wind is not something I know either. Is that a movie or a TV show? Yeah, I'm not sure. I picture him being younger. You know what? He might have been on Sex and the City at some point. I feel like so many male actors were on Sex and the City once, at least, if they started acting in like, the late 90s. But yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look into it. So the episode pretty much ends with that one girl that had been on the front page being raped. These girls who were on the radio show because What's-His-Face is like super excited about getting a college radio show that's going to be like kind of political. And he has the two, different factions on. And they get the news about this girl being raped while they're on the air and storm out. And that's kind of where things end, is this one girl being victimized and them blaming the guys who write for the Lampoon. I will say, the dudes who write for the Lampoon look absolutely horror-struck when they hear the news. It's very clear these dudes did not think what they did or wrote or joked about was going to have any sort of effect. And they underestimated the influence that they had. And I think they're realizing that like blame is going to land squarely on them. This is going to be a real blow against them. And maybe they were being super thoughtless about the whole thing. I'm hoping that's what the look of horror was. And that it wasn't just, oh, we're in trouble. It could just be, oh, shit, now we're in trouble. But I'm hoping it's more of a like big picture, like, oh, God, we didn't think this would happen. And now we realize this is about more than just making a fucking joke that we think is really clever. But yeah, this is the sort of thing that I like really get irritated about when people have platforms and they want so bad to use their platform to say whatever they want. They'll make complete use of the audience that is available to them. But then when they are called out, they try to hide behind the fact that people shouldn't take it seriously and that's not my responsibility. And it's like, I mean, you have some responsibility for what you're putting out into the world when you know you have an audience listening. That's just a fact. You have to consider that. You don't get to have your cake and eat it too and be like, yeah, I'm going to make money probably off of this. I'm going to get like public support from this, but also don't listen to me. That's not how that works, kids. So maybe they'll have learned something. I don't know. It's awfully hard to say because let's be honest, when it comes to rape culture, boys don't learn easily. You know, they tend to be the kind of sheltered because it doesn't affect them often that sees rape as like a big bad crime that happens to other people because they don't talk to the women in their lives about what they've gone through. And so they don't think of it as common as it is. They think of it as like, you know, a getting grabbed on the street by a stranger and pulled into an alley kind of crime, rather than I met this really cute, sweet guy at this concert and he spiked my drink kind of situation, which it very frequently is that instead. It's often a friend, you know, or somebody trusted. Oh, Rachel says, did you watch Better Call Saul? He wasn't a main character, but he was in a bunch of episodes. I watched like the first season and a half, so maybe that's where I know him from. But yeah, okay. So I think I've definitely gone over time, but thank you guys so much for hanging out and listening. I'm sorry that that things started late, that I had to take a break to go put my contact back in. I appreciate you all. Rachel says, sorry to interrupt the rape combo. No, it's fine. I mean, I've said all of this before and you guys know I'm preaching to the choir out here. And let me double check and see when the next Veronica Mars episode is, just so that we are all on the same page. So today is what, the 15th? And it was meant to be on like oh my God, I was looking at 2019. So yeah, this is the next episode's on the 24th. And then there's one on the 26th. And then we've got the 24th and 28th of July, and then the next one isn't until August 21st. And that is season 2, episode 8. I think my bookings are now into September. And just, I want to remind everybody too that I'm going to be taking a pretty long break in December and the end of November, because that's when I'm getting married and going on my honeymoon. So there's going to be a big portion of the calendar that is completely blocked out in around those dates. So, yeah, if you want me to not have too much time between, you're going to want to get them booked up pretty soon. But if you don't mind there being a big break in there because of, you know, everything else that'll be going on at the time, then it doesn't matter. I just wanted to alert you all. All right, guys, thank you again. And I will see you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.